All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're analyzing what is absolutely the most massive paradigm shift in how global institutions actually combat modern terrorism. We are moving from a world of rigid, incredibly slow-moving bureaucracies to one that demands, well, absolute agility. So we're going to unpack exactly why intelligence services have become the literal bedrock for fighting modern global threats and how new technologies and globalization in general have just completely rewritten the rules of the game.
Now, this right here is the ultimate question facing high-level policy decision-makers today. When you're looking at the totally decentralized nature of modern global security threats, the old playbooks simply don't apply anymore. I mean, you can't just line up tanks on a border to stop an ideology that travels at the speed of fiber optics, right? So how do our agencies adapt to an adversary that lives in the digital ether and can strike anywhere, at literally any time?
To answer that, we're going to follow a chronological journey through 6 key areas today. We'll start with the shift from a bipolar to a volatile world, examine the decentralized global threat, look at how we adapt intelligence structures, and then dive into UN frameworks, legal limits, and finally, sketch out a roadmap for preventative security. Okay, Section 1, from bipolar to volatile. Let's see how this all builds from the geopolitical frameworks of the past. Think back to the Cold War era. It was bipolar. It was all about static deterrence. The Romans had this saying, "Esse vis pacem parabellum." If you want peace, prepare for war. And that was it, right? It was basically a giant staring contest between state actors. But our modern era, it's multilateral and incredibly volatile. We're seeing the sudden emergence of failing states, which unfortunately act as incubators for extremism, alongside decentralized actors who are completely empowered by the globalized economy. The old static deterrence model? Yeah, that's been completely shattered.
To put it into a simple analogy, we basically have to transition from a rigid castle defense to an agile immune system. Think about a castle. It just sits there with its high walls, waiting around for a visible army to attack. But an immune system, it's proactive. It constantly patrols the body, seeking out microscopic, decentralized threats across borders before they can multiply and cause actual harm. And that is exactly what modern intelligence has to be.
Moving on to Section 2, the decentralized global threat. Let's really characterize the exact nature of this new, borderless adversary. What's really fascinating and terrifying is that these modern networks are purposefully designed to exploit the vulnerabilities of our slow, overly bureaucratic traditional security institutions. Modern jihadist terrorism is heavily decentralized. It operates horizontally, kind of like a network of networks, rather than your traditional top-down military hierarchy. They rely heavily on the internet, and they use terror without any moral limits, simply as a tool for intimidation. So while government agencies are busy filling out paperwork in triplicate, these networks are literally crowdsourcing their next move globally.
And because of that horizontal structure, they don't even need to issue top-down orders anymore. Instead, they issue ideological invitations online. They just put the ideology and the tactical manuals out there on the internet and simply invite lone wolves or independent cells to take action. This is a massive challenge for traditional intelligence because you aren't intercepting a general's orders anymore. You're trying to find a needle in a global digital haystack of web traffic. So, Section 3, Adapting Intelligence Structures. How do agencies actually change their internal cycles to overcome this institutional inertia?
The absolute most crucial point here is that our security posture has to evolve. We cannot practice reactive security anymore, just waiting around for an incident to happen so we can investigate it later. We have to move toward intensive, fluid intelligence, where our agencies actually adapt to the enemy's rhythm. And ultimately, the goal is entirely proactive prevention, anticipating and neutralizing the threat long before it ever materializes.
Now, to pull off that proactive prevention, there's been a major shift in where resources go. Open source data analytics, or OSINT, and signal tracking, which is SIGINT, are completely revolutionary for tracking digital footprints and, say, terror financing networks. But actually, despite all this incredible technology, placing an infiltrated agent inside these diffuse networks, human intelligence, or HUMINT, has become the undisputed top priority. Because at the end of the day, you need human context to truly understand an adversary's intent.
And that human insight is exactly what's required to escape a reactive, linear mindset. Think about aviation security post 9/11. Someone tries to use a shoe bomb, and suddenly we spend the next 20 years obsessively making millions of passengers take their shoes off at the airport, right? That's a linear reaction to a past event. But the adversary is agile. They aren't going to use the same trick twice. So our intelligence must be divergent. We have to think laterally and actually anticipate how terror groups are going to innovate next.
All right, Section 4, UN Frameworks and Collaboration. Since this threat spans continents, let's look at the international bodies coordinating the response.
Following the devastating September 11 attacks, it became terrifyingly clear that keeping intelligence locked in regional silos was basically fatal. So the UN stepped in with Security Council Resolution 1373, and this was a massive turning point. It legally mandated international cooperation, forcing states to criminalize terror financing, secure their borders, and crucially, to start tearing down the walls between their respective intelligence agencies. To actually enforce all of this, the UN established the Counterterrorism Executive Directorate, or CTED. What's really vital about this structure is how they standardize intelligence reporting across multinational task forces. They literally deploy highly specialized technical expert groups all over the globe to help individual countries with specific vulnerabilities. We're talking about things like maritime security, border control, and tracking those illicit financial flows we mentioned earlier.
Look, if there is one fundamental takeaway for high-level policymakers regarding international coordination, it is this. Intelligence sharing is no longer just necessary or a good idea. It is strictly obligatory. The global intelligence communities universally recognized that there's no way to fight a globally networked threat without a completely globalized, obligatory exchange of strategic information. A threat to one is quite literally a vulnerability for all.
Which brings us to Section 5, Human Rights and Legal Limits. Remember those online invitations to terrorism we talked about earlier? Well, a major milestone in combating that was UN Resolution 1624, passed back in 2005. It specifically targets the incitement of terrorism, requiring states to legally prohibit it. But I want you to notice the second half of that definition. It also requires enhancing intercultural dialogue. It recognizes that, hey, we can't just police our way out of this. We have to address the ideological root causes and carefully manage public perceptions. Furthermore, the UN consistently emphasizes a really critical balancing act. Any counterterrorism intelligence gathering, whether it's digital surveillance or human infiltration, must remain strictly compatible with international human rights laws, refugee rights, and humanitarian obligations. And let me tell you, this is a tremendous organizational challenge for intelligence leaders. They have to maintain operational secrecy to protect their sources, but they also have to ensure that the very civil liberties and democratic values they're trying to protect aren't dismantled in a blind pursuit of security.
And finally, Section 6, Roadmap for Preventative Security. Let's map out some actionable insights here.
Looking forward, we have to recognize that different regions face vastly unique operational challenges. In Europe, for example, the vulnerability often centers on open border control, which requires really deep intelligence coordination through Europol. Conversely, parts of Africa or the Middle East might struggle with the security vacuum created by failing states. That requires a totally different approach, like capacity building from the UN Counterterrorism Committee or relying on global Interpol databases. You have to tailor the intelligence solution to the specific regional vulnerability. But true proactive intelligence isn't just about looking at today's terrorists. Analysts have to look far beyond the current landscape to these foundational macro drivers. They have to ask, how will shifts in global demographics, the devastating impacts of climate change, or the next massive wave of technological innovation create tomorrow's failing states or new radicalized groups? By studying these drivers, institutions can actually predict and mitigate emerging threats before they ever turn into violence. So ultimately, what you should take away from this explainer is a complete redefinition of the word security. Modern security is no longer about static physical barriers, walls, or metal detectors. It's a horizontal pillar of civil liberty built entirely on deep, predictive knowledge. We protect our societies not by eliminating all risk, because, let's be real, that's impossible, but by managing uncertainty through vastly superior intelligence. Which brings us to our final thought. We've seen how the threat has morphed into a decentralized digital network, and how our intelligence services really have to act as this global, proactive immune system. But the ultimate test remains. As global threats continue to rapidly evolve, are institutions truly agile enough to prevent the next major crisis? I'm going to leave you with that critical question to consider as you think about the future of international intelligence and global stability. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.